Hey guys, another campfire story dream here. It was literally a dream of mine. These were dreams, but I promised you I'd make another video earlier today, and so I am. Today's been a very long day. I've been out in the storms today here in Texas that are starting up, so I'm a little kind of, I guess you would say, disturbed, but anyway. So when I was a little girl, there were times that my dreams were very vivid and very intense. I can tell you that as a little girl in my dreams, a lot of times I was being chased by things that didn't really make sense, and like they would gain on me, and it's like in the cartoons when you'd try to run but your feet were anchored in place. I've had many of those dreams before. Then the one dreams that I wanted to share, I must have been about 6 or 7 in this, and it was a 3 day dream. I'd never experienced a 3 day dream, and it wasn't exactly the same, and I'll explain it. So in my dream, where we live, honestly, where we lived back then in New Mexico, we lived in an area that had dormant volcanoes, that had been dormant for a while. And in my dream, that it was something happened. Like there was this giant earthquake, and the earthquake lasted for like a while. It shook the whole state. I mean, it wasn't just in our area, it had shaken the whole state of New Mexico. And um, at this too, there was volcanoes that had become active in our land again, and the mountains had become active. And so in my dream, as a little girl, I am trying to help these people across the cracks. And some were family members, some were neighbors, some were people I didn't even know that were stranded and they needed to get away. And so the dream started off in the center, like by the opening of the lava, the big lava shoot up. It was kind of like a geyser. It was really weird. But then the cracks started forming fissures and things like that in the ground, and the earth started shaking. So it was shaking while there was fire going. So I'm sitting here trying to jump across these cracks, and I look back and I see others that are, stranded, and they're not sure what to do. So I go back and I'm helping them, try to get all of them to get across these cracks before they get intense. And so it starts out small, but then it starts rapidly becoming bigger and more shakier and more threatening. So I get them to about the middle of this one area, and then I wake up. And so the next night, I was a little bit shocked whenever I went back into that same area, that same dream, and it took off from where it had left off, about in the center of the area. And so I'm again helping them because I know there's this one area over toward the edge that I'm going to get them to, that it's going to be safe. And so I'm sitting here helping them all jump across and getting over there. And then I wake up. And for the third night, it was really interesting because the third night I go back in at the same place where I left off the second night, and I'm finally able to get everybody, just as these cracks are getting bigger and bigger, and I see families that are going to be stuck on one area if we don't hurry up. Just as I think one of us is going to fall in, I get us over to the end, and we were able all to get out of there. So I woke up with that dream. That dream was a little intense. And so some of my dreams have been like, I had an uncanny sense when I was a little girl when things weren't right, like people weren't right. Like I just could feel that they weren't right. Their thoughts weren't good. They weren't what they should have been. And it could have been just because of the abuse that we endured at a young age and everything like that. But I do know that there was a dream where I had that was warning me to stay away from this one person that we knew as kids. Like our families worked together, and it's a company called Spring City Knitting, and she had a son and she had a daughter. And so my brother, my sister, and I, we and my family would go over there. They had this thing called a neighborhood watch that they did at the time. And my brother and my sister would always get taken back. And now this is not a dream, this is in real life. They would get taken back into the place of the sister where they were supposed to be. And she never waited for me to get through there. I was always the last one because my brother and my sister got in there first, and she was supposed to take me back too. But I think her brother and her were up to no good because I wound up getting stuck in the garage with him, and I could just tell just by the look he was giving me, the look in his eyes. And I was a young girl at this time. I was like 6, 7 years old, and I'd have to be running around cars and things just to get away from him until I made it safely. Well, he was one of the ones that actually in my dreams would sit there and chase me too, but I can't explain it. It was just really oddball, and so the dream warned me about him as well, not to be around that area. Um, Another dream I had was we would get sick quite often in this house, is this double wide where we lived, because we were lucky to have maybe one meal a day, if that, just because of the living situation difficulties. They were really hard. My father grew up during the Depression, and he didn't want to live depressed like his family did, but he didn't know how to manage money, and it was just, he made too much for us to be on welfare, but at the same time we never could get the help that we needed. And my mother before that had worked 2 jobs, and she had heart trouble, so I was always looking after my brother and my sister because she always leaned on me to be able to help try to take care of them, which I never even understood how to. So anyway, in this dream, I'm sick. Well, literally, I'm sick on the couch. And so we would sleep on the couch out there in our living room, and my mother had an Afghan that we would cover up in. And so in my dream, I had this weird dream, but I'm feverish, of course, because I'm sick. And then all of a sudden, this music that I had grown up in the 80s and stuff with, the words started with "Let me take you far away," just like a holiday. And as the song went on in my dream, I was walking on this land, and I came to a house of cards. It was a deck of cards. It was a house made out of a deck of cards, and I went inside, and because I was told to go in there and to wait, because I was going to see things that were going to start helping me to know what I'm looking at and realizing what it is in the spirit realm, I guess. And so I'm sitting in this pulpit, these like long wooden pulpits, and on one side, not pulpit, pew, sorry. On the one side is a piano. I want to say the piano was to the left of me, and then an organ was off to the right, and there was a pulpit in the center. Well, on the piano was a cut off goat's head, just like it had freshly been cut off. It was on there. And on the organ, there was a cut off ram's head. And in the center of those two was a pulpit that had an hourglass on it, and it was called the Church of Tomorrow. And I knew that there was something wrong with it. I don't know what it was. I just knew. It just gave me a really creepy feeling that I had that. And so it wasn't it was very intense. I did have other dreams too, for instance, like when I was 15 and I had gotten pregnant by my son's father. He was a cartel member. I was not allowed to see my family. He made sure that I couldn't see them, and if I did sneak out and came back, we'd fight and things like that. But I rarely got to do anything. I couldn't even call them on the phone, and back then it was landlines. If that doesn't date me, right? So I'm in this place of misery, and I can't see my family. And I had heard all of these horror stories about women dying in childbirth, and they were sure to tell me about these horror stories and about women being butchered in backstreet shops that were trying to, get rid of their kids and before they had them. And so I heard, it terrified me. I was 15 and pregnant. I had no one to talk to, nobody, because I wasn't allowed to. And the only one I could talk to was his mother. And of course, what good is that when she's kind of going along with her son on it? And so I had a dream, because I was worried sick that something was going to happen. I wasn't going to make it through childbirth. And that night I had a dream that I was holding my baby a month later. That I saw my baby. It was probably more than a month later, because he was big enough. I think he must have been like 6 months, 7 months. I was holding him on my hip in the kitchen in the apartment. And so I go into labor, and my son's father at the time, he changes tires on semis at a truck stop. And so, of course, he does work till like 10, 11 o'clock at night. I go into labor early. I think I went into labor at like 8 o'clock. And at 11, I had suffered with going into the labor. I wasn't sure when my water was going to break. This was like a first time thing for me. I mean, I wasn't even allowed to go to Lamaze class because there was no money for me to be able to go and learn how to breathe or any of that. And so I guess he thought I was just going to tough it out. And I did. I went in there, and my mother actually showed up there. I was surprised she had even found out that I was in labor. I don't know how she found out about it, but she was there. My brother, my sister was there with me, and it was more comforting to have them around. And so this guy, he was mad at me for not having his blankety blank kid anytime soon. And I was having so much problems, and so they decided to induce my labor. And they induced it to come to realize that they were horrified because my son was now trying to come, and I was only 4 centimeters dilated, and I wasn't getting any more dilated. You're supposed to go to 10. And so then they gave me a shot to slow it down. Yeah, see, real good right there, right? And with this guy screaming and yelling at me, my mother got so mad. I was so surprised because in a video I made earlier, she was a strong little woman for her age and her height. Boy, she's going to protect if she's going to protect. And so one of the times I do remember her fondly, and she got the doctors in there, had them throw him out because they stood at the door and listened to him berate me while I was pregnant and stuff. And so they got him out, and then next thing I know, my heart is trying to stop, is slowing down to a stop as the labor pains came. I still wasn't dilated, and then my son was slowing to a stop when it came to the labor pain ending. And so they had to rush us out of there, and they had to gas me, and they had to get us, they had to operate and stuff. But the dream that I made it in an apartment, I did a couple months later. I was in my own apartment. It took a lot of doing to get away from that man, but I was in my own apartment, and I had my baby on my hip just like the dream had. But when I was still with this guy, when I was pregnant, he was a very cruel man. I had told myself I loved him. I had made myself believe I did because he was my baby's father, and it hurt when I wasn't wanted and things like that because, women, they get bigger during their pregnancy, and of course I wasn't everybody's cup of tea. But he made my life miserable, and he was out every night. Every single night he went out with other women. I would have girls coming and knocking at my door asking me if so-and-so was my husband because he was out with their sister, or I'd have a sheriff show up at my door and ask me if so-and-so was my husband. He's in jail because he was caught in the car with minors and alcohol, and if I wanted to bail him out. And of course, no, I was like, I'm not bailing him out. He can stay there. But it was a miserable experience, and so I would start crying at night. He was so cruel to me. I would break down and cry, even cry when he was gone. I couldn't see my family. I didn't have anybody at the time to talk to. There's just no way to reach out, and he didn't have cell phones back then. So I was very lonely and called horrible names, just terrible things. And so I started crying and praying for death. I started begging God every night. Every night I would cry because he made sure that he wasn't happy until I cried, whether he was just being cruel with his words or being mean physically to me. I would sit there and I'd cry and I'd beg the Lord for death. I would pray and plead with God to just take me. I didn't want to be there anymore. I just didn't want to suffer anymore. And I didn't want my child to have to go through that with me either. And so that night, I had a dream where I was being held up in the air, and I was held above the mountains. There were mountains there. You could look down and see the valleys. It was like dusk, or I think that's what you call it, but early dusk, where you could still see, like the sun has just barely got the cast out, and you could see stars in the sky, and you could see the valley and the trees, and there's this pretty little, like, creek or brook or whatever. And it was clear because like the moon was slightly being seen. It was casting off the reflecting the water. It was so pretty where I was, and it was still. It was still. I was being held in the air, just being held up in the air, and I could look down and see all of that below me. And next thing I know, I hear patience. Cause see, I could feel my heart break. I had brought the pain. My life was so much pain, and it's been this way in my sleep too, that I carry the real world into my dreams with me, that the pain, it just is so deep in my heart and so deeply entrenched that even when I dream, I don't get away from it. It's still there, and I'm still heartbroken. And so I'm sitting there feeling the heartbreak, but then all of a sudden, I just hear this word, this silent, like whisper, echo. Like it was so weird. It whispered patience like that. And the way it wound around me, because it was coming in and it would wind itself around me as if you could put a picture to like music notes when they're played in certain ways, how they would wind and wrap and form a picture. Well, that's what his words did. They came in on like a wind, like you're sitting at the top of a mountain. If you've ever heard the wind echo off from canyons, it sounded like that. The wind, the voice that came in on, but at the same time, it sounded like water, like rushing water, like waterfalls. That, but then it also, I could hear like a heartbeat of a cricket, like not the heartbeat, but the sound, like in a heartbeat, I could hear the cricket, or I could hear a frog, or I could hear birds with each of this time that kind of wound around me, and heard patience. And when he said patience in that wind and that water voice of his, it brought stillness, and then the noise would come in, or the crickets or the birds or whatever, but it was just so beautiful because it was like just the running water and the breeze. And so he told me patience, and in other words, patience with where I'm at right now, because he's got other plans for me, which he's always been beautifully perfect that way. And then another time when I was a little girl, my grandparents lived in Cottonwood, Arizona, and in the summers, because there was three of us, my siblings, my sister and me and my brother, one summer it would be my sister and I that would go spend the summer with my grandparents while my parents were able to take care of my brother. Another summer he would go spend with my grandparents, and my parents would take care of us. Well, it was my turn, and on the way to Arizona from New Mexico, where that was, I had managed to get really sick, and it was during the summertime, so it was really hot, and I was sweating. I had a headache. I didn't know what was going on. I could still remember that because it was an intense sickness, and it wasn't car sickness. We found out what it was later, but my grandpa, he started worrying about me because I didn't want nothing to eat. I didn't want nothing to drink. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't eating. Drinking, none of that. And I started falling asleep and passing out in the car, even with the air conditioning on. I was still passing out, and I was feverish, and I think they even said that my clothes had been soaked from sweat. And so my grandfather had done this beautiful work in his life. He was like such a saint, if ever there was a saint on the earth. Never had a harsh word for anybody. He was a kind man that gave with his heart, and people loved him. And so there's this pharmacy that he wound up wanting to get me to before they got to Cottonwood, because theirs were closed early, and the pharmacy that he knew that stayed open late at night, they would open just for him, because he made the call to them, and asked if they could do that past closing, and the pharmacist was like, yeah, we'll stay open just for you. And so they got me medicine. The pharmacist looked, and of course I had red spots on my tongue. My tongue was swollen. I had red spots on it, and I was very feverish, and I started getting like reddish rashes in my face. And so he gave me medicine, and they waited there for a little bit for me to take it, and it was hard to get me to swallow anything because my throat was so dry, and I still didn't want to drink anything. And I wound up being able to go back to Cottonwood with them, and I was in and out of consciousness quite a lot. In fact, my grandmother, she was worried about me too, and it turned out I was even struggling even worse because I have been allergic to the medicine because I am keenly sensitive to medicines. And so I had an allergic reaction to this medicine because it was pushing to break the fever at the same time to treat the scarlet fever is what it was that I had. And so it's trying to push it out of my system. It's like trying to get rid of it right away. And because I was allergic to that, it caused a whole breakout with my face on all sides, which is rosacea, which I have more of a triggered rosacea from it. And they had to have him open his pharmacy back up again late at night. And because at the time they didn't have insurance for us because we were their grandchildren. I mean, it's not like they didn't have money. They just didn't have our insurance because my parents never got us on insurance because there was never any money. And so we went back and they got the right medicine for me. And I was out on the couch for a week. They said I was gone for like a week in and out of consciousness. And during those times, I barely remember my grandmother forcing me to drink some broth and to sit up. And I just was so miserable. And I remember telling her, I had a dream about Adam and Eve. And we were in the garden. And I was asking them why this and why that. And then she goes, you were even muttering about them in your sleep. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even remember some of this. But yeah, so I have had my moments, and I have had dreams where I'm trying to escape from these enemies that have guns, and they're after me. They're going to do bad things. They're going to kill me, or they're going to try to hurt me or hurt my family. And I'm trying to hide people. I'm trying to get away from people. That's all my dreams have been about in some of these. And like I've had some really frightening things go on that we can't explain that happened either. And so my stepmother never experienced things like that before. And one day we're standing in the kitchen talking over at this place in Utah that we were living, and I'm holding a saucer of cereal, just a really small saucer, and I'm just casually eating it because I don't really eat a lot in the mornings. In fact, if I eat at all, but my nutritionist says I have to. Anyway, she got to watch it. I got attacked. And so what happened is as I'm eating my cereal, all of a sudden I felt my hand get slapped and the bowl went flying across the room. And so she was in shock. She's like, I've never seen that before. And I'm like, yeah, well, I've had that happen many times. I do have marks on me. I am marked. I have a 7 on my left arm. Not that that means anything, but I also have a cross, a naturally formed cross on the inside of my wrist. I have been marked, and I know the dream that I've been weighed and found wanting a while back that I shared with you. So my life has been more on a serious note because I remember always being told that, now is the time that we need to be weeping for our nation and weeping for the unsaved. Laughter can come later. As a little child, this is what I was taught, so I didn't know how to take jokes. I didn't know how to live. My life had already been picked out for me. It had been chosen for me because I didn't have a choice with the decisions that I was made to do. But at the same time, that's what we were taught, was that weeping is now because joy and laughter will be in the morning. But we must be sure to keep our hearts pure and our hearts kind, to be able to pray for others and not to be a hypocrite when we pray, to look at ourselves first. If there is anything that we are holding back, we need to pray forgiveness and relinquish that before we pray for others, so our prayers are not hindered. And I will share a couple of interesting, funny points with the other ones. So another time, I've been sick with Arnold Chiari, and I have pinched nerves all in my lower back and my upper back because of just my lineage and some of the bone issues that some of the Ashkenazi traits have. Even though it's a very small bit I have of that, I still have the bone issues, and so it causes pinched nerves in my back and things. And so I get miserable and I try not to complain. What I try to do when those headaches are so severe, I try to put on sunglasses or I try to lock myself in the room where people don't have to watch me suffer. I know in the years to pass that I found get my dates pierced and my trays pierced, the days were the hardest because they hurt the worst, but they took my migraines that I would get once or twice a month that would leave me in bed for 3 to 4 days, and they'd make them like where I'd only get them once a year, which, oh, thank God, that was a relief. But during this time, I had a lot of baggage with complaining, even if it was to myself. Like, maybe not even complain, I'd just cry because I'd be so miserable. I'd sit there and cry. Anyways, so then the Lord, he tells me, he goes, okay, he goes, what are you being like now? It was one of the times I was really complaining about why me, blah, blah, blah. And he's all, who are you being like? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, yeah, he goes, who are you being like? And I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. He's like, you're being like the Israelites that wandered in the desert and saw all the miracles, and even though they had God among them, they still complaining. He goes, are you gonna be a Moses or are you gonna be an Israelite? And I'm like, that took me. And another time that made me laugh was whenever I had sinned and I get corrected right away by God. God's been good. He's been nice and loud in my life, and while everybody else seems to get away with stuff, I don't. I'm one of those that, nope, I hear about it or I know about it because he allows stuff or people in my life, like right then and right there, or even like an hour or two later, he allows things. So I know that it's him very adamantly correcting me. And so I don't regret it though. I love that connection. So anyway, although sometimes it bothers me a little bit, I'm sitting there in my dream. Earlier, I had sinned